Hi, welcome to the Dev Team Show. My name is James. In this episode, we're going to take a look at the 2017 Stack Overflow Developer Survey results. Joining me today are some of my fellow Treehouse teachers, Craig Dennis, Alena Holligan, and Kenneth Love. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having us here.
So, just to give you some context here, Stack Overflow has been doing a developer survey since around 2011. Since 2011. This is the largest response that they've had yet. 64,000 developers, users of their website, responded to the survey. The questions were categorized or grouped into 4 high-level categories: developer profile, technology, work, and community. Be sure to check the show notes. There's going to be a link to the survey. So if you want to take a look at that, pause the video, or just follow along as we're talking, that's how you can get to it. So I wanted to kind of dive into some demographics first. And specifically, and maybe this isn't surprising, but 72.6% of the respondents said that they were web developers, which seemed a little high to me, but maybe not incredibly high. But of that group, 63.7% said they were full stack web developers. I personally would have expected a little bit more specialization than that. Like for instance, only 11.9% said they were specifically front-end developers. And for whatever reason, that number seemed low to me. What did you think? Did you have any impression or any reaction to that?
Yeah, I totally think that 12% is that's really low for just a front end only. I guess maybe that's because people are stretching more into what they claim is full stack web development. I think that's one of those things where that's not fully defined maybe enough. Like when you're asking the question. I mean, to me, I think that there's quite a few more front end. Maybe you don't know too. There was also a lot of beginners on the list there too, answering the questions. And we don't know what the question looked like as well. So yeah, I was actually surprised by that too. I thought that was interesting.
Well, I think partially DevOps. What does that actually mean to you? What does it mean that you're a full stack developer? If it's something that runs on the server, then it's backend. If it's something that runs on the front end, well, if I do PHP and JavaScript, there I'm a full stack developer. So
which I definitely would agree with.
But so most people that do backend also dive into some sort of JavaScript or something. Sure. So if you're identify as a backend developer, you probably identify as a full stack developer. So
you could also have a bit of a selection problem too, right? If you have somebody who's maybe their job is web designer, or they see themselves as being a web designer, they just work on the front end, right? JavaScript, CSS, whatever. They may see this developer survey and go, well, I'm not a developer, I'm a designer, and not ever fill it out.
That's true.
Right? Because they don't feel like they're part of that group. They're not a developer, they're a designer. So this isn't the survey for me.
Did anyone here actually take the survey? I actually missed it when they were doing
I didn't take
the
it
collection.
this year, but I think I did last year or the year before.
Yeah, I've done one of the previous years, but I missed it this year. So I didn't get a chance to see the actual survey itself, and I went looking for it. The further I dug into these results, the more questions I had around how the questions were asked, and was it fill in the blank, or was it some massive multiple choice list?
Yeah, there was several questions where it wasn't clear. It's those numbers don't add up, so it must have been multiple choice.
Right,
but yeah, there was a couple of those where it's I don't know. You're saying the most popular, but then so it was confusing in that way. I agree. So
the other thing in terms of demographics, it seemed to be a wide range of experience or level of experience, which was really encouraging. I was glad to see that there wasn't one particular group or the other. There wasn't just everyone saying I'm an expert and have been an expert for a long time. So that I think that breadth of experience was pretty cool to see. Unfortunately, kind of the disappointing side of it was heavily male.
White male.
White male, even further, right?
Yeah.
And so that obviously is tough to see. Such a stark acknowledgement of where we're at.
It
as
is
an
Stack
industry.
Overflow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's typically white males on Stack Overflow because it's not the friendliest community. So
interesting.
Most women that I know avoid it. They just don't want the criticism to ask the questions there. They don't feel comfortable, especially if you're a beginner. You don't want to ask the question there. Why Why would I want to feel worse about myself when I already feel bad that I can't figure out this answer on my own?
Interesting. Are there other resources that people tend to use more than Stack Overflow?
I think a lot of people search and don't participate, which is
Yeah.
really sad.
I think there's a lot more consumption than
Yes.
there is. Well, I mean, even outside of any things like, oh, I don't want to feel worse about myself or whatever, Stack Overflow, because of their gamified system of how you are able to ask or answer or whatever questions, makes it very difficult for somebody to like break in now. Because you have to have a certain number of points before you can go and like answer a question. You can only leave comments or whatever.
Yeah.
So unless you're willing to dive into that whole system, you can't necessarily participate in the community at all.
Right. I'm assuming that the survey was open. That was
No, yeah, that
Right.
is, yeah.
I think what is cool about that, I mean, yes, it's sad, but it is very like, yo, look at this problem that we have right now in tech. Right?
Sure.
Like I think like not even just like people self-selecting out of the survey itself, but that is a problem. Do you don't think it's that at that number in reality?
I don't know. I don't know that it's necessarily at that number, but I would also say that you have a lot of different things at play.
Okay.
I think that's fair. Yep. The other aspect of that, just while we're on the topic that was discouraging, was later in the survey when they were talking about, I think it was underneath the work section. Yeah, I think that's what it was. But the part that asked about like, how important do you think diversity is in the
Sure.
workplace? And maybe these stats are published probably in a lot of other places, I would assume. But I haven't looked at that recently in particular. But again, white males voted the lowest in terms
Sure.
of how important it was. It was like in the 60%, if I remember correctly off the top of my head. And yeah, it was surprising and disappointing for me anyway. As
Yeah,
part of that
especially
group.
since there's been so much concrete evidence showing how valuable diversity is. You've got people, everybody uses and consumes the internet and apps and all of that stuff, and it tends to be actually women who do a lot more of the purchasing that they show. So you would think that you would want more input from those demographics if those are the people that you're actually trying to sell to.
Right.
But, again, I think we're starting to see that, and I hope that is a trend that continues to rise. I don't know. I did not look at the past results if that has changed
Yeah,
Like,
I
over
did.
the years.
I
over
don't-
the years,
yeah,
or
didn't
I don't know
look
if they
at that either.
just started the diversity, if they asked the diversity last year or not. I'm not sure. I'd be
Yeah.
interested to see if it changes between this year and next year.
Sure.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's become a lot more of a
Well, and
talking point.
that's an interesting comment in general about all of this, right? In terms of the relevance and how you use this information. That just looking at a static number in a particular year doesn't tell you probably
Right.
a lot about what is actually happening in the industry, and it's that year to year, the trend, the comparison of it that may not guarantee, but might be more interesting.
I think more valuable, definitely, in most regards.
Yeah. So moving on to education. So at Treehouse, this is a kind of a topic that we all pay attention to. I did find it interesting that there were a majority, 76.5% said that they had bachelor's degree or higher college education, which again, not having a degree in computer science, it surprised me.
Well, I don't think the survey asked if their degree was in computer science, did it? Or was it just a college degree?
There was a subsequent question
Okay.
that asked them, and I believe it was around 50% said it was in computer
Right.
science. So yeah, it was something less than that total, of course. But
Well, I think we're a group, the programmers in general, we're a group that we typically tend to enjoy learning, or we tend to enjoy, logical thought, like that kind of thing, which
Yeah.
lends itself to schooling. So you get a lot of people who, they go to college for some degree, even if
Yep.
it's not what they end up in, right? Or you go to school for 2 years and then you drop out or whatever. So I don't find it weird that many people had schooling. I find it very heartening that, say, 50% or whatever of that 70-something percent had CS degrees. Like, I don't have a CS degree. I don't think any of us do. And it's nice to see that so much of the other people in the industry don't need
right,
that degree.
right.
And that also, like, if you look at the 20 years plus numbers that were like, you know, when there was like experience, like that could be part of the people with those degrees, right? And I did see quite a bit of change, or what felt like quite a bit of change of the numbers in there. So like 90% self-taught.
Yeah,
along those
yeah,
lines, right?
I had made a note of that as well.
Yeah.
That and in which has to be regardless of whatever level of education you've achieved. 90% of all the respondents said, "I'm also self-taught to some degree."
Sure.
Which I think is a pretty strong indication of kind of like what we're choosing to do as we become developers, right? Yeah. And of those, 80.2% said they used the official docs as a way of teaching
Great.
themselves, which again, for whatever reason, even though I use the docs a lot myself, I just hadn't really spent time thinking about how important docs are to the industry as a whole. Clearly, they're important.
Right.
Clearly, we should be caring a lot about how well docs are written.
And saying thank you.
Technical writing is insanely hard. Yeah. I think that shows a good trend in projects, especially open source projects, now putting more time into docs and training. Like, I remember when Django project first came out, obviously my little part of the world, but one of the things that really set it apart was it had very well written, very easy to read docs. And so you're like, well, of course I want to use this. Like, I can go read that thing, and I don't want to tear my eyes out like I'm reading API documentation.
Right.
And that goes a long way. Like, I've noticed a lot of other libraries. Love 2D is an amazing little Lua gaming library that has beautifully written and beautifully designed docs, and you want to sit and read the docs.
Right.
As opposed to, like I said, something where you're just reading like an API, and you're like, okay, cool, there's methods.
And it is a benefit to programmers, I think. My husband's a network engineer, and most of the docs that he reads are useless, if not worse.
They're probably written from the companies who produce the technology.
Yeah, and they're blatantly wrong. No, this is not the way that it worked.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful if you can read the docs. It's great to have that. It allows us to get better and to be able to do that. Or I think as programmers, we have that as a benefit. Whereas I think it's a lot harder for people who are on that networking engineer end of things. They don't have as great of a learning environment.
And they don't necessarily have the benefit of being able to go and look at the code. Like, if all else fails, like you have no docs for something, okay, cool, I'll go, so long as it's open source, I'll go look at the code and figure out what it's doing.
Right.
Depending on the networking, on the hardware, it may be a black box where you have no idea what's going on inside there.
Right. I think that the documentation has been part of, like you said, for the Django project, it's been part of like what makes an open source project, and like to be to survive, you need to have better docs these days, which I think is cool. I think it's pointing to that. I think that has not always been the case. Like, that number would not. I bet if we look back further, the docs, not only the official docs, didn't exist, like you're saying.
We have an annual conference here in Portland that's simply about writing documentation.
Yeah.
So it's obviously like coming up as an important topic for people.
Yeah, and it's I mean, stating the obvious, or maybe not obvious to some people, that evaluating the docs, that's a great way to gauge or to measure sort of your own level of interest in something. Like, if you're looking at a technology and you go look at the docs and it's poorly written or it's not there, that might be a warning sign, that this may not be something that's worth your time. Or it might be an opportunity for you to get involved and to help.
Right.
Which is a great place to lend some help. So one last thing that I thought was worth calling out was that 64.7% would recommend online courses to other people for training. So I think that was encouraging. So regarding technology, JavaScript was obviously a very popular language. It had 62.5% of the respondents said they used JavaScript. SQL, 51.2% was the number 2.
I mean, you can't get away from it, right? Like, even if you're using an ORM or whatever, you're still using SQL in there somewhere. You're probably going to have to go and tweak some query.
Do you think you would do that? That you would say that, like, I use SQL daily because I use an ORM? I don't know. If I was taking that, I would think, oh, maybe I write SQL reports and that's why I would check the SQL. I don't think I would do it because of the ORM.
No, I don't think people do it because of the ORM. I just think there's no such thing as an ORM that doesn't eventually fall short.
Sure.
Right. So you end up having to write some SQL to augment the ORM.
Totally. But I found that kind of like, whoa, so many people are using this still. Like, I mean, I guess one of the things that we could probably talk about later too is that there's these more data sciencey roles up in here in this developer service. So maybe that's why there's more SQL.
Well, and like sysops, DevOps people, they could be writing a lot of SQL to diagnose why problems are happening. You know, well, the site keeps slowing down at 2 a.m. every day. Okay, let's go look through our logs that we store in a database and find out what's going on at 2 a.m. or, you know, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, as a web developer, I find that I'm easily distracted by much more interesting things than SQL, you know? And SQL feels to me like something that I learned years ago and I kind of have in my back pocket when I need it, but I don't spend a lot of time like using it, you know, or learning like new keywords and new...
Totally. It's been abstracted away from you. Like you're doing it, but you're not doing it.
Right.
You're not writing it. So.
The other thing I found confusing about the survey itself was the labels that they used around identifying specific technologies. Just to give an example, like they mentioned React.
Okay.
Well, React is like a suite of stuff. So I found myself wondering, like if that was just meant to be a broad umbrella. Does that include React Native, for instance, or does it not? And if it didn't, I didn't see React Native mentioned anywhere else in the results, which surprised me a little bit.
Well, and wouldn't React results all be folded into JavaScript results anyway?
Yeah, yes and no, but when you're thinking about like specifically like mobile development, I found myself wanting to know a little bit more about people's level of interest in that, and I wasn't able to see what I was looking for, you know, because of that. Another example, for instance, was they refer to AngularJS, but there was no mention of like Angular 1 versus Angular 2, which these are, even though they share in name, they're like two different technologies.
Distinct,
So I felt a little disappointed that there wasn't any way to tease out, at least in the results as they've published so far. Not maybe in the raw data that's different, but in the results that they published, it was difficult or impossible to tell what they were talking about.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely like namespace collisions from my world. There's like there's a Spark framework, and it's under the framework section, and it's actually under frameworks, libraries, and tools. And there's a Spark web framework, and there's a Spark like databasey sort of big data playground thing. And it's like, which one are you talking about? Right. So yeah, definitely saw that too.
The other thing that I found initially disappointing, but I think I've rationalized a brighter way to look at this. The languages over time data. So C# over time has gone from 45%. In terms of like who says they use it, to 34%. It had the biggest drop.
That's a good drop. Yeah.
It's a huge drop. Python went the opposite direction, went from 22% to 32%. JavaScript went from 57% to 62%, and Node.js went from 8% to 26%.
And that's just from last year, right?
No, I think that was over time since they've been doing it.
Okay.
Now, the way that I started to rationalize this was I think this might be not as descriptive of people's level of interest in a technology, but might describe more about how their user base has expanded over time. So I get the impression that initially there might have been more prevalence of .NET C# developers.
Maybe a bit more enterprise people.
Right. And then as they've grown and broadened their user base over time, it's not hard for me to imagine, I don't have anything to back this up.
It's diversified in the audiences that are attracted to it.
Right. Into JavaScript developers, right? Which would change those numbers.
We're all just going to gradually converge into JavaScript anyway. It doesn't matter.
Well, it brings about the question of actually utilizing this data. And that's, as a developer, you run into that all the time. What does this data tell you? And how do you get the results you're actually looking for?
100% validation. That's all I was looking for.
James is supposed to be told he's teaching the right language. That's it. You're doing good work, James.
Thank you.
But just wanting to know, is this, is this giving me the results I think it's giving me? And that's something we all have to be careful of. We make assumptions all the time, whether we're writing stuff or whether we're reading a survey, or those results, are they from the 2011 until today? Or is it from the last year? Those could make a huge difference. Do we know for sure what it is? What are those results really showing? Yeah, you have the results, but you don't. It's hard to know what they're actually showing. Right. And I think some of that is we as developers forget about that as we write our own stuff. Oh, whoa, look at this. I'm going to put this out there. How many of you have ever touched this language and this is the new, greatest, latest thing, but nobody's using it in production?
Yeah,
Right.
there's
Okay.
going to be tons of people who suddenly go back to their company and go, okay, we've got to go build stuff in JavaScript because the Stack Overflow survey says that JavaScript's the hot language. And it's like, that's cool, but literally all you're doing is DevOps stuff. Do you need JavaScript everywhere in that stack? Like, probably not. You probably want a bunch of languages. So yeah, people are going to misread this all the time.
Yeah.
It's just like any survey, any amount of data.
Under the loved, so they by language and framework and platform, they said what's
Right.
most loved, dreaded, and wanted. Rust came in really high, which wasn't like in of itself surprising. But then the number 2 was Smalltalk, which was surprising. I was like, I can't remember the last time I heard someone like give a talk about Smalltalk or
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
Small
not-
talk about small talk.
Just chatting over.
It's like I think it's like
drinks.
one of those like, oh, I love it. I miss small talk. That's how I read that. I was like, oh, that's cute. That's cute that's there.
so it's endearing.
Yeah, I was like, aw.
Small talk is kind of interesting because it's kind of like C, where it's one of those languages that has begat a huge number of other languages
Right.
that still holds some appeal to people. Like,
Right.
yeah, it's just interesting. how
and
that
I
language lives
apologize
on.
for the Smalltalk developers who are watching this. I no judgment.
It's a fine language.
Yeah, and I'm very grateful that they, paved the way for so many other object-oriented languages.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's like, this is a new feature that's coming out in this language. You're like, oh, this was around in small talk. You're like, what?
Like,
Like everything that comes
around
from
for
small
decades.
talk has been. Yeah, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, those guys did a lot. And maybe that's what that's about. That's kind of how I read that. I was like, oh, thanks, guy.
It is kind of surprising that Rust was like the number 1 loved language or whatever when it hasn't really been around that long. Like, it's fairly fresh.
right.
And yet it has attracted a huge amount of audience.
So loved, I think there, because I read that too, and I was like, come on, who like
Am I
who's actually
misconstruing that?
done?
I think it's I want to be doing this. I want
Right.
to be doing some Rust.
Well, it could be that they love doing it like when they played with it in their spare time. It's not necessarily loved like we love this in production. It's I've loved writing this language. It's been fun to write.
And I think that would be more, again, see, it's that how are you going to interpret this?
Right.
Again, I think that would be, the loved would be more of a, this is what I do in my spare time, because wouldn't I do a language I enjoy in my spare time, even if I might write something else for work?
Yeah, you're gonna do a
And-
hackathon. I'm gonna do it in
and-
Rust.
I enjoy the stuff that I do in my spare time and get to write what I want to write, not what I necessarily do as my day job.
So it's like I love my spare time.
I love my spare time,
Well,
not
and-
necessarily
And to be
Rust.
fair, when you're learning something, there's a honeymoon phase you
Yeah.
go through
Yeah.
where,
Sure.
where everything's
Absolutely.
amazing about the thing that you're learning
Yeah.
before you discover where the problems lie.
Totally.
Right?
The dreaded there, I felt so bad for VB6. That thing
Well, it wasn't
VBA was in there too.
VBA was in there and VB.net, to be fair.
Just all of
came out-
VB.
but that thing came out to make life easier. It was so much easier. So many people got their starts in there. Now people just hate it, and it feels bad. It
Yeah.
feels bad.
So I've actually done years of VB programming.
Yeah.
Kind
putting in dread.
kind of reluctantly, you know.
Right, it's in
So,
your-
but I would, but not because it's not like something you can be productive at or something
Right.
you can make a living at, but just because it's not something that I'm interested in. Because while you're doing something, it's taking away your opportunity to do something else, right? It's that opportunity cost that I think I would tangle with the most.
Well, like, Craig and I were talking about this earlier too, that there's this very common misconception that it's surprising people haven't caught on to yet in tech, that tech goes away, but it doesn't. Tech never goes away, right? Like you're like, okay, cool, we're going to write this thing and I'm going to use VBA on it because I can do that I can do it in 20 minutes and it'll be done. And we'll replace this with a full-fledged app next month.
Later.
You will never replace that with a full, right? Because the VBA will work well enough that it will
Right.
stick around. And so
Right.
someone gets stuck with maintaining that because it's threaded. Someone has to maintain that forever. And I mean, well, this
and
is
then
like,
they fill out the survey.
and they thought,
Dread-
right,
dread
and they
this.
dread doing VBA.
I hate having to do the horrible code that was written 20 years ago, and it happens to be written in VB.
Right. Well, we have this as actually like it's becoming a more major problem here in the U.S. Most of our banking, income tax, and military security applications are written in COBOL and Fortran because those were the languages that were in demand in the 60s and 70s and 80s when all this was written. So banks are having a really, really hard time finding people to maintain the Fortran code that runs their like loan systems.
Yeah.
And it's like, because tech never goes away.
Right.
That Fortran will be running 50 years from now.
Right.
because no one's ever going to take the time to replace it, and it will be on our dreaded list.
Nice. So moving on to the work section, there was one piece of data in there that really stood out to me, and I think you guys probably saw it as well, that under job discovery, 26.8% said they found a new position through a friend, family member, or former colleague.
It's all who you know.
And it really, I mean,
I
and
thought that was fairly low.
fair enough. I've had that personal experience myself, that finding a position and not having to even do like a formal interview process because you kind of come through a trusted source. I mean, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just surprised that it was not higher because most people that I know have found jobs through some sort of network.
Yeah.
Either, an acquaintance of an acquaintance, but it's about who you know. I think that's very important and something that should not be neglected is building that network.
And on the other side too, of like also helping people out when they need to come in, right? Like remembering that, like if it's there and it's at 26 and we expect it to be higher, if you are in a place where you are working and you do have connections, like bring those people in.
And there's also the other side of that too, though, where the networks that we tend to have people to bring in from are often homogenous networks to us. They're people who look like us.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to increase those diversity numbers, we want more women, we want more people of color, we want more LGBT, whoever, you need to not prioritize the friend of a friend.
Right.
Like as a hiring person, right? If you're a hiring manager, it's really cool that Craig recommended somebody and you should totally talk to them, but you should put just as much weight on them or give just as much weight to the other people that get brought in through traditional channels or through local diversity groups or whatever as you put on Craig's friend.
Sure. Or make better friends.
There's also that.
Right.
That's very hard to do.
Yeah.
Deliberately.
Yeah. That's very hard to do. Humans are not good at that.
Yeah.
So, but before we move on to what I would call the speed round, which we'll get to in a second here, is there anything, any other comments that anyone wanted to make about the survey itself or any results within there?
The only thing I was going to bring, you talked about how Python had a big jump, and I think that is probably really due to data science becoming a bigger thing, as opposed to more people writing, Django or Flask or whatever. I think a lot of that is just in the data science world because we have some really good tools and like pandas and NumPy that can do that work pretty easily for people. And I think that's a big part of why the Python got the jump it did. And I think also JavaScript got the jump it did is because of data science too, for people doing the analytics side where they have to create graphs, create charts, create, whatever to help visualize the data.
Yep. Alena?
It falls along the same lines as Craig and I were talking about with, where do you get, if you see these results and you see, this is the new latest technology, what should I start learning? Well, it's not about where to start. There's some great resources out there. I would say all of our teachers, their basics courses are great and they're easy to learn and friendly, and you can get started on the basics of programming in whatever language you want.
Yeah.
It's not as much about where to start as where do you want to end up.
Yeah.
Like each language has its strengths.
Yeah.
And like Kenneth was saying with the data science, as that's growing, if you're interested in data science, then by all means, go towards Python.
Totally, yeah.
Because it works really well in that. If you want to go more of the corporate America type of thing, go Java. I mean, that's where...
Or C#.
Or C#. Yeah, but that's where...
Can't help me out.
Okay.
He needs that validation.
I know that C# there. But, so where are you trying to go? Are you trying to do freelance? PHP is a great one, especially for people who want to go freelance. That's one of the top ones I tell people. If you want to do freelance, it's way easy to get started with PHP. Yeah. So it's really more about what are you trying to accomplish in your goals than it is necessarily about reading a survey or finding the newest, latest, greatest thing, is to make sure that you kind of put this filter on things coming into you.
Yeah.
You just have to understand everything has way more nuance than it looks like, right? Like you see the 25 to 32 or whatever the jump was in Python, you're like, oh, wow, Python, right? It's huge, but you have to realize like, okay, yeah, but it has all these little areas, right?
If you want to go into corporate banking, probably learn Fortran. Don't learn Python.
Fortran 77 and
Help you.
COBOL, Smalltalk maybe. Like these are the natural, like
Yeah.
all those mainframe languages. You will have a job for life.
Yeah, and it's a good point that it's one survey,
Yeah.
and it's one survey in 1 year, that we're looking at primarily, so don't give it too much weight.
And it's a self-selecting community as opposed to like a national census where like everybody has to fill it out. Right.
Yep. That's a good point too. Okay. Speed round. So I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and just some of these are going to be pretty simple, straightforward, but just try to keep it moving. Short answers if you can.
Okay.
So how do you pronounce GIF? So what, that graphics interchange format?
That's what it is. Yeah.
I can't believe I actually remembered that. How do you pronounce it?
I know that it probably is supposed to be GIF, but I say animated GIF. I do. Sorry.
GIF.
Yeah, I'm GIF. So we're split, 50-50.
We're split down the middle.
Which matches, I think, the results.
It probably does, yeah. What I loved about that question was there was an option that was like something else.
Oh, that they say each letter G-I. Oh, yeah, there was just
Well, it was
right.
like GIF, GIF,
GIF.
spell it out, or something else. And it's like, what was the something else? How else did you say that? Yeah.
Maybe that information's in the raw data that's yet to be
I would love to
released.
see that. That's the only question I really want the raw data for.
All right, next question. Do you prefer to listen to music while coding, or do you need it to be quiet?
I absolutely need music. Absolutely, without a doubt. Punk rock.
It depends on what I'm doing.
Interesting.
I tend to, if I want to focus, I like sounds. That was one of their answers.
Right,
I
like
do like to listen
whale
to music or
music,
sound.
yeah.
Or something like cello and piano music. The piano guy,
Yeah.
really good. Cello and piano. Can't get much better than that.
I'm the weird one, I guess. I listen to like video game live streams. Mostly from my
Really?
friend Owen. He has a very calm, quiet voice.
Do they narrate while they play?
Yeah, so like they're playing and they're commenting. Usually it's just a lot of cursing as they die.
That's insightful.
So yeah, I'll have those on, or sometimes it's music, but lots of times it's just video game live streams.
I'm very much primarily music. There are times when I kind of like just need to not listen to music, but and then for me, within there is an interesting question too, like what kind of music, because I find myself needing different kinds of motivation musically at different times. All right, it's time to learn. Based upon what you saw in the survey, what would you like to learn?
Oh wow!
It's time to learn.
It's time to, I was waiting for the end of that.
Yeah, I guess I was definitely interested by the extreme. I'm going to fall for it. The extreme love for Rust.
Yeah.
There. I think that's it.
I think it's time to learn. I think that's really what
stop there.
Stop there. I mean, that's I think what the survey showed.
I was asking you personally though. Was there anything you saw that was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe I should check that out? No,
I don't know that
okay
something
to say no.
specific stood out like that. I do think it really stood out that you have to keep learning. And those people that had the degrees and they're still learning 90% and they go on, and yes, you have to keep learning. There's lots of different technologies out there. Learning. Keep learning.
Kenneth?
I'll do C# just to give you a bump.
So my answer is a little odd because I didn't see the thing that I wanted to confirm to myself. But Elm, I was looking for Elm in there, and so I actually started learning Elm this week because I've been wanting to do that. So
Despite the survey.
Despite the
It didn't even
survey.
show up.
All right, last question. I predict that in next year's survey,
That we are going to see diversity numbers grow
Yes.
up way high. Everything we want to see is
Yes.
gonna be there because people are going to be more open, and Stack Overflow community is going to change into a place where it's welcoming,
yeah,
and that's what I believe.
excellent. Alena.
I would really like to see that.
I'd love to see
I
that.
wonder
It'd be
how we
amazing.
can promote that.
That's the only
just did.
clip we're
Yeah.
gonna. That's the only clip we're gonna have. Is that one?
I don't know. I would like to see that. We could be positive and go with Craig's. Let's see this and the diversity numbers to rise. But I do think I would like to see that. I would still predict that it will probably be low, but I would also predict that we'll see an increase in the diversity numbers. And I'm going to say there's still going to be a lot of conflict.
Okay, Kenneth.
I think we will start to see stuff pull away a bit more because it seemed like the top 4 or 5, 6 languages were fairly close in usage.
Mhm.
I think we'll start to see like JavaScript, Python, React, because I know they had that kind of a separate thing. I think we'll start to see those pull away because we're getting into more of a data-heavy world. Maybe you'll start to see things listed as like Hadoop or some of the other deep learning, TensorFlow, right? Those will start being way higher, and we'll start to see a drop off of the more traditional languages, even though they're just as good as the others. I think that's probably what we'll start to see over the next.
I would like to see more deep learning. I would say we'll probably see more deep learning on a survey next year.
That's definitely gonna. I'm part of a conference, and we just finished our call for papers. We have an inordinate number of papers for things like GraphQL and TensorFlow and all these like deep learning things. So I think that's going to really be a big area over the next couple of years.
Cool. That'd be exciting to see.
I imagine that there will be something on the dreaded list that didn't exist before written in JavaScript.
Maybe it's up to us to create that thing that's going to be the most dreaded.
Right.
A new flavor of VB.
Hopefully we will.
VB JavaScript.
Hopefully next year we will see that they've applied deep learning technologies to the survey results so that we're not left with all these ambiguities.
There we go.
Yeah, excellent. Great. Well, Craig, Alena, Kenneth, thanks for joining me to talk about the Stack Overflow survey results. This has been fun.
Thanks for having us. It was fun.
Thanks for having us.
That was great.
So be sure to check the show notes for links to additional resources and let us know how we're doing. Be sure to rate this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.